Welcome, everyone, to another episode of The More You Give. I'm your host, Jackie Barnum. Today's episode is brought to you by VetTix. VetTix is an organization that provides sports tickets, entertainment tickets to shows for veterans and service members. Go check out their website at vettix.org. That's VETTIX.org. As a disclaimer, everything I say in this podcast is my own opinion, Jackie Barnum, and is not endorsed by the Department of Defense or the Marine Corps. Okay, so I am super excited about today's episode. Upon the idea of even starting this podcast, it was honestly inspired by this guest. We have Ryan Manion, who is the president of the Travis Manion Foundation. And even just going on your website, it's like there's so many more things, has written books, does public speaking events, does just so many things. So I have been looking forward to this for so long, and I cannot wait to talk to you. So thank you so much, Ryan, for being on this show today.
Yeah, I'm happy to.
I want to honestly talk about first because I haven't met you in person, but I feel like I know you. And I straight up slid into your DMs a year ago because I just happened to be looking on Instagram and I saw Ryan Manion started following you. And I was like, my jaw dropped and I was like, oh my gosh, I got so excited. I think I texted a few people about it. And then I messaged you and I just was like, Ryan, I am so honored that you're following me. Please let me know if you ever need. I just was because I've known who you are for a long time. I've, been involved in Travis Manion events at the Naval Academy and whatnot. And so I've known who you are from afar. And then I just was total fangirling over you. But then what was cool was that you messaged me back, immediately. And you're like, oh, I'm actually a huge fan of yours. And I just was like, let me just faint over here so that was just sliding into your DMs just worked.
Well, I have to tell you, you were and are my daughter is such a huge fan of yours, and I've shared with you that my daughter, is the Naval Academy is somewhere that she's thinking about going, and I was born into a military family. My dad's a colonel in the Marine Corps. My brother was a Marine. I've been surrounded by Marines, hence my children have been surrounded by Marines. But I will say my kids have not been exposed to many, if at all, female Marines. And so, this idea when we would talk to Maggie about the military, my oldest daughter, she couldn't even picture herself in the Marine Corps because she identified it as a very male-driven industry. Marines are men. And when she started following you, she all of a sudden began to see herself in Marine shoes. And so I thank you for that because, you think that growing up in a household that's filled with Marines, she would identify with that. But it wasn't until she found you that she started to see oh, I can see myself in these shoes now. So, or these little heels. So I thank you for that. And she's a big fan of yours. And like I said, I'm a big fan of yours as well.
That means so much to me. I know, I feel like when I was her age, there was no one to look at, and I feel because, Instagram was so new. I think I made my Instagram when I was at the Naval Academy. So, it's just, having someone to be oh, I actually can see myself doing those things. So I love that I've connected with her and connected to you through all that. So it's just so awesome. The first thing I want to talk about with you is kind of speaking of Maggie and the next generation. You have a podcast called The Resilient Life that talks about resilience, and me being a company officer at the Naval Academy Prep School, dealing with 18, 19, 20-year-old kids kind of, they're adults, but they're just leaving home or going through that transition, and teaching that age group resilience. How do you like, what advice can you give, or how do you start instilling resilience in that age group, or even, kids younger?
Well, it's interesting because so through the work of the Travis Manion Foundation, I'll tell you a little backstory. When we started the Travis Manion Foundation, one of our main objectives was, of course, to provide support to returning veterans and families of the fallen. But our original mission statement also had, our original mission statement was provide support to returning veterans and families of the fallen, and to play a role in creating the next generation of leaders. And I will tell you, when we put that mission statement together, we didn't know what that meant, but we just knew that somehow we wanted to play in that space. We knew how important it was for young kids who are making these decisions about what the rest of their lives look like. And, today we actually train veterans to mentor youth and talk to youth about character and resilience and what it means to live a life of service. And, it's, I don't feel so far removed from like when I was in high school, like these things, that small things can seem like the end of the world, right? I look at my kids now. I've got two teenage daughters, and it's all about putting things in perspective for them. And my favorite thing to say to my kids, because for my 13-year-old, the world's ending over the smallest things, right? Every day. And and then for my 15-year-old, she's in this position now where she's trying to identify, like, what does my life look like? And she's starting to think about, like, where do I want to go to school? Where do I want to go to college? And just last week she did bad on a history test, and she came home and it was like her world had ended. And I said, Maggie, failure is a bruise, not a tattoo. That is one of my favorite sayings, but it's also a value at the Travis Manion Foundation. It's one of our values. And I think it's so important for not just kids, but for everybody to understand that, like, life is a series of ebbs and flows, right? And we can't allow one small failure to define us. And if we are kind of attuned to this idea that our life is these peaks and valleys, it makes, like, the difficult times easier to digest. And it's always what I'm saying. I'm like, listen, you did poorly on this test. Well, guess what? That gives you the opportunity to do well next time. And it's about knowing that no matter how low you get, you have to know that you can always work your way out. And if you can kind of stick with that mindset, it's obviously much easier said than done. But if you can stick to that mindset, it makes things so much more palatable in this, like, journey of life. We know that, like, we're in a low, but we're always going to come up from there. And we just have to keep practicing that and believing in that. And, resiliency is like, you've got to practice it. It's not something where you can just be like, I'm going to be resilient. Like, oh, I'm going to be resilient. You have to actually practice the art of resilience. And you practice it when you have to be resilient, right? And so you have to remind yourselves in those times where you're challenged, where you're dealing with adversity. You have to remind yourself that, like, this is, one page in a book, and you can turn that page very quickly, and you can work yourself into the next chapter.
Right. And my favorite saying that I think about when I think of resiliency is the only way through is through. That's
Yeah.
what I try to tell my students. And I have noticed, like, for me growing up, saying the word quit, like, I can, it like makes me like uncomfortable to even say those words, like, but sometimes I've seen this trend of students where as soon as things get hard, it's easy for them to look me in the eyes and say, I quit. I want to be done. And I don't know if that's because some people just are raised differently where, people are like, oh, it's okay. If you don't want to do this, you don't have to. You don't have to do this if you don't want to. And if you kind of instill that in their minds and they actually get to the Naval Academy or Naval Academy Prep School or boot camp or OCS or whatever, and they're actually faced with, like, a no kidding challenge, they don't know how to push through. It's just they're used to just saying like, well, I'm uncomfortable, so I don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, listen, as a parent, you never want to see your kids struggling. You never want to see your kids like dealing with anything uncomfortable. But every time my kids do deal with something uncomfortable or challenging, I'm grateful for that because I know that's preparing them for what comes next in life. And, if you're not going to if you're going to be kind of coddled, and we talk about this with character, like the end of the day, you can be a straight A student, you can be an all-American athlete, but if no one's teaching you how to be like a good person, you can still be a jerk and be a straight A student and an all-American athlete. And guess what? Guess what's most important out of those three things? Being a good person, right? Doing the right thing. And so, it's important to like kind of teach your kids and that like these are such important life lessons. And you can't be afraid to listen. If you quit or you keep going, it's going to be hard either way, right? Like either way, it's hard. So that's what I always say. Like you can quit or you can keep going. Both ways are going to be hard. So pick which way you want to go.
Right. And I think an interesting thing too with resilience is that there's kind of like a fine line that I mean, I'm not a parent, but I like to think of myself as a parent sometimes to my students, but like we
Sure.
watch them and we see them, struggling, and we need them to struggle. We can't, like you said, we can't coddle them all the time. We can't always, catch them, and they need to learn through failure sometimes. But then how do you know when to intervene, and how do you know because they could fall and then they could really, really keep falling. And I'm just curious, like, what your thoughts are on when's that point where you're like, okay, they actually need like this person needs some help now.
Yeah, well, I had General Dunford on my podcast, and I got to talk to him a lot about resilience. And he said something, and I leaned back on it. I actually was just sharing it with my staff last week. We did a whole debrief of like his talk on my podcast because some of the things he said, everything that he says, I think is so incredible. But when we started talking about resilient, he said, you know what, Ryan, you can't be resilient and be alone. And he talked about the need for like embracing your support system, right? Like relationships are everything. And we have to, number one, allow ourselves to be carried forward by those that love us when we're in these hard times. But we also have to recognize when we need to reach out and say, hey, I'm going to be here to lift you up and help you through this time. And there's nothing wrong, number one, with asking for help, and there's nothing wrong with offering help. That's not giving the easy way out to your kids or your students. That's just saying like, hey, this is the place you're in, and I'm going to help you get through to the next step. So, I think it's always okay to say, what can I do to help you get through this phase?
Right. And that's, yeah, I have a whole thing. I know you have the Travis Manion Foundation does tons of mentoring programs, which is amazing. And then I've recently started trying to do connecting people with mentors, because you're right, like we're not alone. And every problem, and I try to tell whenever I have Marines or my students, I say like, no problem that you will face is an original problem. There is somebody who has been through it, somebody who has figured this out. Like, no, there is no permanent situation that we can't fix. And just trying to, and then there's kids, of course, who are so used to being on their own and not asking for help. And for me personally, I feel like when I was that age, I was just so trying to be under the radar and not bother people and not ask questions, because I was in that like survival mode for 4 years at the Naval Academy, just trying not to get yelled at. But I think I did myself a disservice by not reaching out to people for more help, because I really did feel very alone for a long time. Even as when I commissioned, it's only really until recently where I'm like, okay, there's like people around here that can help me. So what advice would you give, even like to your daughter, about reaching out to people and getting guidance now, not waiting?
I will say this is one of the things that I struggle with. Again, I talk about a lot. Like I growing up in a military family, my dad's a retired Marine Corps colonel, and like for a very long time growing up, like ailments were kind of the body only, right? Not of the mind. And then like in the off chance they were of the mind and you were kind of like struggling with stuff, like they could be healed by the body. Like I remember, even saying like when I was young in high school, if I would say, and my mom was much more, understanding, but if I would say like I was in a bad place or anything talking about kind of how I was feeling, my dad would say, "We'll go for a run." And I would be like, okay. So like that's what I would do, like go for a run. Like a run could cure everything. And so I was almost like trained to believe that like anything that I was struggling with, if I just went for a run, it would make it better. I wasn't kind of like taught to reach out and to express my feelings and so that's kind of how I became as an adult when I struggled. And I definitely went through some challenging times after I lost my brother. And I was kind of afraid to say, like, hey, I'm not feeling myself. I don't feel, I mean, when my brother died, I went and ran a marathon. I was like, I guess I got to go on an even longer run now, right? Like, this is what I have to do.
Oh, wow.
So, but then I started to realize, like, well, no, I need a little bit more than that. So that's actually a big challenge for me. And it's something that I'm always pushing, like, and I still have trouble kind of expressing, like, I'm in a bad place because I always feel like I have to be the problem solver. So, with my kids, I'm always trying to talk to them in a way that I didn't always get talked to, right? Like, kind of, how are you feeling? Like, pulse checks with them, right? As opposed to just everything like, what kind of grades are you getting? What's going on here? What's going on there? But just trying to be their friend in a way that, like, I want them to feel like they can tell me anything. Like I'm an open book. You will never be judged, and we will always find a way through any situation together. And so, but the art of practicing that myself is something that I'm still working on, I will say.
Right. And I think as a Marine, and my old CO, who's my mentor, would do this to me, is he would humanize himself literally when giving me advice. And he still does this to this day because I ask him anything and everything. And he will be like, okay, Jackie, this is Billy talking to you. Like, this is Billy. This isn't Lieutenant Colonel, whoever, this is Billy talking to Jackie. And this is, and I think that is really huge and something that I will say, like, a really rewarding moment that I had recently actually with a student, and advice that I would give is this, don't give up on kids when they're closed off. Because I had a student, I could tell something was wrong. You could just kind of tell when they're like a little disheveled, or, you could just picked up as a mom, you can like pick these things
Yeah.
up really quickly. But so I pulled him in and I was just like, hey, Steven, how are you doing? Is everything okay? And yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. I'm like, and just closed book, would not open up. And I was like, okay, well, I've just noticed you're not yourself lately. So just remember, like, if anything's going on, like, I am here. And he walked out the door, literally 2 minutes, came back and knocked on the door. And he said, ma'am, I actually like really appreciate you asking. Can I actually tell you what's going on now? And I just was like, yes, please. Of course. It takes that little bit of like, that trust. You got to build some trust first. But I was like, so when he came back, I was like, oh, yes, okay. Like, and I could tell as soon as he got that off his chest, and I, gave him some advice and let him just speak, he physically like looked like a little bit of a weight was lifted off his shoulders. Because I think a lot of these kids, again, like, going through that transition in life, signing up to serve their country, going to the Naval Academy. So like mentally they're like preparing to be adults. So they think they have to deal with all these things on their own, and they just don't. And I hear so often where I ask, like, why didn't you tell anybody about this? Like, we could have helped you so long ago. And in their minds, I don't know where this comes from, and I want to break this cycle, but I've heard a few times where they say, well, like, when I ask for help, that's weak. And I just
Well, yeah.
like, oh,
Yeah, and I think that's unfortunately still a little bit of the culture that exists in the military. I think there's been big strides taken to overcome that, but it is. I mean, you can say 1,000 times over, "Tell us how you're feeling. Tell us how you're feeling," but you know, to say like I'm struggling, all of a sudden it's like, well, we're preparing you to be America's, leading fighting force. Like you can't, so it's a double edged sword. So I totally get the idea of, these prep kids and Naval Academy students and, kids going through OCS. They don't want to say that they're having an issue, because
right.
all of a sudden that singles them out as like, hey, that kid's kind of going through something. Whereas, frankly, right now, I think it puts you in a state of strength because it's like, hey, I have the strength to come out and say, like, this is what I'm dealing with and I'm ready to tackle it head on.
Right. And especially when these kids this age, that are my students, I've noticed it's that age where, that loss is first time for them. So a lot of, losing of an aunt or a parent or a grandparent. And that's the first time that they're dealing with this and having to kind of help them navigate that grief. But there's a lot of them that go through that. Unfortunately, I hate that for them and it pains me when my students are in pain, but just having them be able to support each other and providing them the resources and be like, hey, you're not alone. And not only what you're going through, like you're going through this and it's hard and you're going to come out stronger, but you are now a resource to somebody else that will be
Yeah,
going through this.
totally.
So, Ryan, question for you about the Travis Manion Foundation. When it started, what was kind of like the first, because I know just looking on the Travis Manion Foundation like website, it's like events. So what was like the first kind of event that you all put together?
So the first actual event, we weren't the Travis Manion Foundation at this point. So after Travis was killed, again, you want to talk about like social media. At the time, it was like MySpace was. You probably are too young for this, but MySpace was
Oh,
like
I have a
social media.
MySpace.
Okay,
It's out
so
there and it won't be deleted. And I hope no one goes and searches for it because
so that
it's
was
out
kind of
there.
yeah, that was the social media platform. Facebook really kind of was a college thing. Like it was kind of starting on college campuses. And so there was no there was no GoFundMe or any of these like fundraising platforms or anything like that. And when Travis was killed, um, my parents' friends said, we want to set up a memorial fund, and they went to like a local bank in our town, and they set up the First Lieutenant Travis Manion Memorial Fund, and in Travis's obituary, it was like, in lieu of flowers, please donate to the First Lieutenant Travis Manion Memorial Fund. And it was like an address of a local bank, right? It was like, send your checks in here. So, you think about like these platforms today that are just go viral, but in even in that kind of old school approach, a couple of weeks after Travis's death, we had several $100,000 in this bank account. And at the time, we had no idea what we were going to do with it. We knew we wanted to do something at the Naval Academy. We wanted to do something at Travis's high school, but beyond that, we weren't thinking of the Travis Manion Foundation. But we were like, all right, well, we're just going to keep like doing events, and kind of for us, it was just about like keeping Travis's memory alive, and so the first thing we actually did was run the Marine Corps Marathon, because Travis had signed up to run the marathon 2 weeks prior when he was in Iraq. He had called my dad, and my dad had run the Marine Corps Marathon several times because he was a Marine, but he hadn't run in probably 10 years the marathon, and never thought he was going to run again. And my brother called him from Iraq and said, "Hey, Dad, I just signed up for the Marine Corps Marathon. Why don't we run it together?" And, my dad's like, "What do you do when your son calls you from Iraq?" Like, I'd retired my marathon shoes, but I was like, all right, I guess I'm running. So my dad signed up, and I'll never forget, we were sitting in my parents' family room, and there was a ton of people there. This was a few days after Travis had died. And, we're kind of like, just everybody's just sitting around. And my dad said, like, well, Travis had signed up for the Marine Corps Marathon. Like, I'm still going to run it. I'm going to run it for him. And I talk about it in my book because it was like this scene from a movie. There was probably 20 people in the family room, and it went around in the circle, and like the person sitting next to him was like, I'm running it with you, Colonel. And like literally everybody. And I'm talking about like, there were Marines in the room, but there were also like 60-year-old women, and everybody's like, we're running the marathon. And I'm like, I'm sitting like, I'm kind of like last in line, and I'm just like looking down at the carpet, like, I'm not running a marathon, right? And then everybody's looking at me. And I was just like, okay, I guess I'm going to run it too. And, it was really, for me, it was so therapeutic to just like focus on something. So, that was in April that Travis was killed. I started training June 1st. So from June 1st to the end of October, like I was on a mission because I'd never run more than 5 miles. Like that was kind of my max. Maybe I'd run a 10K at that point, but like never thought about like distance running in that capacity. So I really had to work at it. But it was really good for me to like have that, like, this is what each day looks like. I've got this goal. I've got to run this, this amount. But we had probably about 60 people run the marathon with us that first year. And I'm talking like out of those 60 people, 58 of them were like first time marathon runners. So it was quite interesting, but we all crossed the finish line together. We raised more money for the First Lieutenant Travis Manion, fund at the time, and Memorial Fund. And now, that event has grown. We're one of the largest charity partners with the Marine Corps Marathon, and we have hundreds of people that run with us every year. And so it's kind of interesting to like look back, that first year we were in the Marriott down in DC. And I mean, we had Travis, we had different people speak about Travis at that dinner. One of them being Brendan Looney, who was Travis's roommate at the academy, and he ran the marathon for Travis. He ran next to my dad that year in 2007, and then he would unfortunately be killed a few years later in Afghanistan. But like, it was a really personal event. So, now we have people that just sign up because they want a charity slot, and we have a low fundraising amount, so they join us. But I love the idea that they're like joining into this thing that started in such like an intimate grassroots way. So it's special. I've done the marathon a couple other times, but I go down there every year just to cheer everyone on.
I will have to admit I have never run a marathon, and now I feel like this is I'm always like waiting for like a sign to run a marathon, and I'm like, oh geez, now maybe this is my sign to run a marathon. The Marine Corps Marathon too. I know. I feel like I'm not like a real Marine until I've run that. But one day, I feel like it's always like raining or snowing or just really horrible conditions, which is like what we thrive on as Marines.
I mean, the last time I ran it was in 2019, and it was torrentially downpouring for like the first 10 miles where we were at Haynes Point, and I was running in like a foot of water, and I was like, I can't believe that I'm running in this. And I was praying for the rain to stop, and it did. And it stopped around like mile 15, but it stopped, and it got so sunny, and it was so steamy that like steam was coming up off the asphalt, and it was so hot that I was praying I was like, start raining again. So yes,
oh my gosh.
It's always terrible conditions, but that's what makes it even sweeter at the end,
So how did you, and when did the Manion WOD CrossFit stuff get tied in? Because that's coming up in this month, right? Like this week. And I was looking at the website to see the events, and it's just like, I think I was like scrolling for a good like 30 seconds with all CrossFit gyms that are participating. So how did that come to be?
So the Manion WOD is a hero WOD through CrossFit. And if you're part of the CrossFit community, like hero WODs are, WOD is workout of the day, right? Like every day you get a WOD. And so these hero WODs are named after fallen service members, but they're actually pretty particular, where they only make hero WODs after fallen service members that they can show proof that they participated in CrossFit. I mean, it's very interesting thing that they do. But so the Manion WOD, actually, there was a Marine that went to the academy and wrestled with Travis. And when he got out of the Marine Corps, he went to work for CrossFit. So when Travis was killed, he was like, Travis and I were doing CrossFit in Iraq. Like, I've got proof of CrossFit, I'm going to make a WOD for Travis. And so he created this WOD, which is, it's 7 rounds of 29 weighted back squats and a 400-meter run. And, that matches up with his date of 4/29/2007. But it's a killer workout. It is all legs, right? So you're doing hundreds of squats and running, I don't know, it's like 2.1 miles all in after you get all the rounds in. And Jimmy Letchford, who designed this workout, designed it because he said, Travis was a wrestler at the academy, and he's like, his legs were like tree trunks. Like, that's where all his strength derived from. But he also ran like a gazelle. Like, he could run forever. And so he's like, he was this interesting combination of having these huge legs, but just could run forever. And so that's kind of how the workout was designed. And then we were able to take it with the Travis Manion Foundation and turn it into an event where it didn't just rest within the CrossFit community, but like bring it out to the broader community of like, hey, do you want like the ultimate challenge to honor fallen service members? Like, here it is. And so, yeah, we've got hundreds of gyms, and then you can sign up individually too. Like, we have thousands of people that just sign up, and you can do the WOD anywhere, which is a great thing. And you can scale it, right? Like, it's weighted back squats, but I mean, most of the people I know that I do it with just do air squats, and it's still, hundreds of air squats, and it's terrible no matter what. But like last year during COVID, a lot of gyms were closed. I actually put out on Instagram, on my story, I was like, hey, doing the Manion WOD in my driveway on this date at this time. If you're interested, DM me for my address. I had like all these veterans that showed up, and I had a sister of a fallen service member. They showed up in my driveway, and we just did the Manion WOD together. So, for us at the foundation, we do a lot of physical activities that are, because we know that, getting back to my dad saying, go for a run, we know how important physical exercise is to your mental health. It's not the only component, but it's a huge component. And then two, there's also that idea that like sometimes we let like fear hold us back from knowing our true potential of what we can accomplish. Like, I never thought I could run a marathon. If I'd had the Manion WOD just given out to me like, hey, do this workout, I'd be like, I can't do that. But when you've got a name tied to it of like a fallen service member, it gives you kind of that extra inspiration. And, we always say at the foundation that Travis's name represents this post 9/11 generation of men and women who have sacrificed, right? Like, we want his name to represent all of these men and women. So like, when you're getting out there and you're thinking about, you're on your like 250th squat and, you just want to die, you think about like, all right, this sucks, but like, this is not anything compared to what this generation of warriors has done and stepped up to do. So it makes it a lot more palatable. And then, then you get past, that fear of the unknown, and you kind of step into this place where you're like, wow, like, I can accomplish so much more than I thought I possibly could.
And then you're reminded, every day for a good 5 days when you're trying to walk downstairs and you cannot because you're
Oh
so
yeah.
sore.
Yeah.
And you're like,
A good 7 days, I would say. Yes.
yeah. Yeah. So, Ryan, for the Travis Manion Foundation, where do you see it, in the next 5, 10, 20 years?
For us at the foundation, when we talk about, we do so many different things. We have so many different programs for veterans, for Gold Star families. and for civilians alike. And, I think that's one of the things that is unique to our organization is that our membership is about 130,000 strong, but civilians make up about 50% of that. And, we want to make sure that we are building a community. And that, in essence, is what our organization is all about, like a community of like-minded individuals that want to go out and get stuff done, whether that's serving in the community, whether that's pushing themselves through physical activity, or whether that's teaching character to the next generation. It's about making sure that we're providing this community that you can feel a part of and understand the essence of our military community. And so, we are pretty set in the programming that we run, and we just put a 10-year strategic plan together, and our plan is just to scale our already existing programs and, be in even more regions, cities, towns across the country.
That is so wonderful. My last question for you is, for you specifically, what is your favorite Travis Manion Foundation event? Because you do, I get the emails, always asking for, for volunteers for this. And then like you do refugee helping and you do the mentoring thing. There's so many ways to get involved. So what's your personal favorite?
For me, I think that the work we do through our character program is not only my favorite, but it's also has the most impact. We have worked with over 500,000 kids across the country to date. Last year, over 50,000. And this idea that, number one, we can give veterans a continued way to serve because, you're still in the uniform. When you take that uniform off, your desire to serve isn't going to go away. And that's what we see from our men and women that are leaving active duty is they're still looking for ways that they can have an impact, that they can give back. And when they're not given that opportunity to continue serving, that's where they run into problems with mental health decline. And so, we want to be a preventative model to say, like, before you're dealing with things that are putting you in a position where you're having to walk into the VA because, you're dealing with mental health challenges, we're going to say, like, hey, you just took off the uniform. All right, we need you doing this, and come be a part of our community. This is the way you can impact the next generation of leaders. And so we find the benefits to that are, and listen, I'm probably the only non-veteran that gets to go up and speak in this character program. I'm leaving tomorrow to head to the Annapolis and give a brief to the second class midshipmen, which is my favorite thing to do every year. I speak at Travis's high school every year. I speak at summer seminar at the Naval Academy every year. And being able to tell that story to kids and like really talk to them about this idea of if not me, then who, they get it, right? And for that 45 minutes that I have that captive audience, I know that some of them, like, their lives are forever changed because all of a sudden it's something like a light bulb has clicked in them. And the veterans that have the opportunity to share their story is so important. It's so important for them to continue sharing their story. So it's my favorite because I think it's the most impactful. And frankly, I think, it's the most important to our society as a whole. We have to keep, playing a role in creating men and women of character. And I can think of no better group to do that than our men and women who served in uniform, to take that uniform off and to go work with these kids and show them what service is all about, regardless of if they serve in the military, right? It's just about teaching them, like, you can be a servant leader in your own backyard. And this is the path that I chose, but this is ultimately all the different ways that you can go out and serve. And it's just so rewarding to see the change that's happening with the youth and the continued service with our military community.
Right. So, Ryan, where can people find you or get more information on the Travis Manion Foundation?
You can go to travismanion.org and you can join our mission. And joining our mission just means you're going to learn about things happening in your local region. that you can be a part of. And you can find Travis Manion Foundation on all social media platforms. Myself as well. I'm probably the most active on Instagram at @rmanion.
Thank you so much. Ryan, is there anything else that you want to say?
No, I mean, thanks so much for having me on. And, again, thank you, Jackie. I think that, I was just showing my dad your Instagram. I was telling him yesterday I was going on with you, and I said, this is who Maggie met with on Zoom, and they talked. And, I just love the idea that there are strong females, young females that are kind of showing a different face to what it means to serve in the military. And you do it in such a great way. So keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you so much, Ryan. I love talking to you. I'm so honored to have you. Your time is so important and valuable. So I'm so jealous that you're going to the Naval Academy this week. Oh, that's like just Annapolis is the best. So enjoy that. Enjoy your time there. So with that, that is all we have for this episode for today. I'm your host, Jackie Barnum. If you want to catch more of my episodes and content, please go follow me on the parade deck. Have a great day.